Hey guys, welcome back to more Karen stories. What would you do if a Karen repeatedly trespassed on your private property and tried to sabotage your business? Let's dive right into the video to find out what OP did. And the title story is called I Shot a Karen That Trespassed in My Private Warehouse. So I'm a small business owner, and while I have found myself in a place of success so that I can support myself, that certainly has not been the case for the entire life of my business. In fact, I originally had a lot of hate aimed at me and my business because of the community I lived in. As you might know, small towns can be rough. I could not just get up and move though. My mother tried to kick me out of the house, but my grandmother was way ahead of her and had her thrown to the curb at the first sign of an ultimatum. That did not mean that my grandmother only had me to rely on when her health started to deteriorate. I'll never complain about being her caretaker with all she did for me. Still, no matter how much my grandmother loved me, I could not convince her to leave the state she had lived in for her entire life. I started my business by building up a social media following, and eventually I was able to step away from my traditional job when I was lucky enough to have a design go viral. One viral design does not make a successful business though, it was the stepping off point I needed to make the leap into the actual hard work. Between running the business and caring for my grandmother, time and money were tight most of the time, but I was ecstatic to have this chance and my grandma supported me every step of the way. I should add, she was the one who got me into fashion in the first place. One of the first things I had to do when I actually had a significant volume of orders was build a warehouse/workshop on the little bit of swampy land that we owned. The house my mom had grown up in was barely bigger than a mobile home, and while I could invade my own space for a small amount of handmade orders, I needed to actually expand. I had a section of it built as a workshop for my handmade designs and premier products, and the rest as storage for the bulk-made products that I could then adjust to customize. All of this is a little too much background, but it should give you an idea how important this business was to me at this point. It was my primary and pretty much sole income to support me and my grandma. It was the pursuit of a passion imparted on me by the most important role model I've had in my life, aka her grandma. It was a way for me to connect with a community that I largely could not access in the region of the US that I lived in. Something as important as this requires a bit of extra protection. I covered every inch of both the exterior and interior of the building under camera surveillance. My grandmother had already thought this was overkill, but while there hadn't been many actively violent acts towards me in the community, I didn't feel that I could afford to underestimate what people could be capable of. So I even hired a security agency to keep my warehouse under watch most nights. The nice thing about the community I lived in was that for the most part these were not people who were in my stretch of the woods in social media. Realistically, there was a good portion of the community that had no clue that I was even a business owner, much less what that business was. However, there was a woman who we will call Karen who learned about it after starting to track her son's social media activity. She was an extremely hateful member of the community, although she was quite skittish in her behavior and often kept it to hateful comments or whispered slurs to her friends. Her discovery led to a significant uptick in insults, especially from the mothers in the community. I took all this in stride and believed that I did not have too much to worry about in terms of physical danger from this group of individuals. They are most often active in social media campaigns, and because of this general disregard, I did not see it as anything more than a coincidence when I began to have issues with the security company. I already suspected that I was getting charged a higher rate than most other businesses in the community, even though my situation was likely lower risk. This was exacerbated when they hiked their prices to absolutely absurd numbers. When I refused to raise the pay, they broke the existing contract a month early, and I was without security in the course of a single day. My grandma just said, "Good riddance." She always hated the idea of paying someone else to help defend her property. I let enough of this pass by me without connecting the events, and as such I figured that I would just allow the security system to do its job and would personally respond if anything happened. Now would be a good time to mention that my grandfather trained me to shoot before he passed. He claimed that every woman should know how to defend themselves properly. I did not like carrying, but I was licensed and I knew basic self-defense if I couldn't use the firearm. The alarm woke me that first night without a guard. I would later figure out that this was because Karen had orchestrated the whole set of circumstances. Her husband was apparently best friends with the man who owned the security company, and she asked for him to get rid of the security in my warehouse as a favor. All I knew at the moment was that when I checked the camera, there was a woman with a gas canister that let herself into my warehouse with a key. I had ensured that the security company returned their keys when they refused to continue working with me, but they had copied my key. Luckily, they didn't think that I might change the alarm codes once they quit. I still get mad at myself for not realizing that the security company's behavior was too sudden to be random, but ultimately I was cautious enough to make this change, which saved my company and livelihood. I grabbed my gun and went out to the warehouse. The door Karen had opened hung wide, and the alarm was bleeding in the wide open space of the storage portion of the facility. I turned on the overhead lights, but Karen was hidden somewhere within the maze of clothing. I could smell the gasoline she had been spreading over the ground. I felt some clothes on a rack near the door and confirmed that she had drenched some of the clothes as well. I called out into the white space, "Hello, who's there?" She replied something that I couldn't hear, and the voice had come from the direction of my workshop. At this point, adrenaline was pulsing through me, but even with panic flooding me, I hadn't pulled my gun out yet. As well as teaching me how to shoot, my grandfather also taught me when to shoot. He insisted that I only do it if someone is threatening my own life at that same moment. I did have my hand on the holster though. I cornered Karen in the workshop where she had ruined many of my ongoing projects with her last dose of gasoline. When I walked into the room, she turned towards me and held up a Zippo. I glanced at the exterior door from the workshop and noticed that the deadbolt was still pulled. As fast as the room would go up with the gas, that deadbolt might be enough to kill both of us. "Karen, you know you don't want to do that," I said, and I raised one hand palm out and gestured to hopefully calm her down. At the same time, I flicked the safety off on my gun. "I don't want to, although things do get complicated if you're in here. You were supposed to stay tucked into bed until the firefighters had nearly arrived." Let's just keep things calm. I started to ease closer to Karen. She reached out and grabbed a pair of scissors, holding them towards me in her offhand. "You get near me and I won't need the lighter. The alarms were not supposed to go off, OP. You have done this to yourself, you dumb." And Karen used a terrible slur for African Americans here that I cannot or don't want to say on YouTube. "Karen, please, let's just both get rid of any weapons and walk out of here together. I won't have any reason to press charges if this does not go any further." I couldn't deny the bitter edge to those words, as I knew she had ruined hundreds of dollars worth of product, but I knew how small that value was compared to the alternative. She laughed at me, and I realized just how dangerous it was that I had ended up cornering her in a small space. Her eyes flicked around and I could tell she felt the walls closing in. Karen said, "You press charges? You're the one who needs to get the F out of my community and stop poisoning the minds of the next generation. You think I want this crap on my son's phone? Karen, if you all just give me that lighter, we can walk away. You don't want to deny your son his mother, do you?" I had risked taking a couple steps forward. Karen lashed out with her scissors and caught my outstretched hand. Blood welled almost immediately. She scurried back and nearly tripped over one of my work stools. It was the most stressful stalemate of my life, but it couldn't remain a stalemate forever. Sirens approached, responding to the alarm. That was when I saw the true deer in the headlights look hit Karen's face. She went to open the Zippo and I was already pulling my gun. It was a good shot, a clean hole through her hand that sent the lighter to the ground, inert. Karen had her hand hugged to her chest and was screaming in shock. I picked up the Zippo and put both the gun and the lighter on the ground in the storage room and then shut the door. When I went to unlock the exterior door, Karen tried to keep me at a distance and this time actually managed to trip and fall to the ground. I then opened the door and exited the warehouse with my hands up while Karen wailed behind me. The cops took us in and I had enough footage of the situation to justify self-defense and make sure that Karen was the one persecuted for her breaking and entering, conspiring, and attempted murder, arson, and vandalism. There was also evidence in her phone that meant that I could sue the security company for their behavior, which meant they ended up having to close down. I never had to learn how my actions would affect the community's perception of me, because this event finally helped me to convince my grandma to move to a more accepting community. She passed away recently, but her legacy continues through my thriving business. Remember to stand up for yourself, people. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed the title story, please don't forget to like the video, because that helps me tremendously in fighting back against the damn AI channels. The next one is a story from r/traumatized them back, which is titled I Just Witnessed a Massacre. So this happened in the upper market aisle earlier this evening. A 20-something man carrying a baby in a sling is trying to shop in peace only to be accosted by an older woman. Making eye contact with him and then me, she loudly proclaims, "I love to see a man doing the babysitting. Are you giving his mom a break?" To which he replies, "I am her mom. I just haven't had a chance to look after myself much with a newborn." Clearly dying inside, the woman splutters, bows backwards, apologizing, and disappears around the corner. He then casually says to me, "I'm her dad, really. I just don't like it when they call it babysitting." It was legendary. Perhaps the greatest thing I've ever seen in real life. I laughed so hard, especially when I rounded the corner and realized that she had heard him, dumped her trolley, and ran out of the shop. Dads of Reddit, next time someone calls taking care of your child babysitting, follow his example, they will never do it again. And the next one is another story from r/traumatized them back, and I gotta say, this subreddit is kind of growing on me. Let me know what you think in the comments about this one. It is titled, Want us to move our freshly buried family member from the family plot? Enjoy not being able to access your farm this spring and your ruined reputation. So in May of 2024, my 40s wife, sister 40s, Sarah 40s, and her fiancé Heath, then 40s, got married. They had been together for 8 years, and in that time Heath had become the father Sarah's daughter Kate, 16, had always deserved. A few weeks after the wedding, he formally adopted Kate. Heath was the kind of man you couldn't help but love. He was funny, genuine, hardworking, always the first to offer help, and always the last one to leave a party because he stayed to clean up. He always looked for an excuse to get the family together, to fire up the grills and break out the bourbon. The last time he did it was his 50th birthday. A month later, almost to the day, he suffered a massive heart attack and then died. I stood with him as groomsman, as did our younger brother-in-law, 30s, and a good friend of Heath's. 6 months later in the same church, we were his pallbearers. To say our family was and still is devastated is an understatement. Our side of the family is a close-knit bunch. We tend to drop the in-law title. My brothers-in-law are my brothers and my wife's sisters are my sisters, and their parents see the three of us as their sons. We genuinely look forward to spending time with one another, and when Heath came on the scene, he quickly became the heart of the family. To both celebrate and mourn the same person in equal fashion in such a short time span was nothing any of us expected, and something I frankly would not wish on anyone. Heath was meticulous in a lot of ways, but the only plan he didn't have in place was where he wanted to be buried. A few weeks before he passed, he and our mother-in-law, Jackie, 70s, talked about the final plans, just conversation. No one knew anything was wrong at the time. She had mentioned wanting to be buried in a family plot with her grandparents and her parents. She said that after she and my father-in-law Mitch, 70s, passed, there would be 2 or 4 spaces available, as most of her cousins had made other arrangements. Heath said that he liked the thought of resting beside them, so cut to November of 2024 and Heath was gone. Plans had to be made quickly and space was available. He died on a Saturday and we buried him the following Friday. On Monday, Jackie received a phone call from one of her cousins, Bertha, in her 60s, not to offer condolences but to ask, "How could you bury that stranger next to Grandma?" The conversation was mostly one-sided. Bertha went on and on about how wrong it was that this man was buried next to their grandmother, that she had visited the town hall to see what could be done. Jackie's only response was, "Bertha, he was my son. We just buried him. We didn't know what else to do." Mitch told us that he had never seen her so angry in 45 plus years of marriage. They decided it was best not to tell Sarah just yet. She did not need the stress on top of mourning. A few days passed and Jackie got a call from Charlotte, in her 70s, another cousin's wife. Charlotte went on to tell Jackie that Bertha and her sister had obtained a lawyer and were gonna attempt to sue Sarah for Heath's removal. It was at this point that Mitch and Jackie decided to go to Sarah and Kate's house and tell them what was going on. Sarah was understandably angry, confused and hurt. She owned the plot that Heath was buried in and the plot beside it, so legally she was fine. But beyond that, how can someone who calls themselves family do something like this? One of the last people to hear the news was my wife. Not because they did not want her to know, but because she's a firm believer in going full scorched earth when someone screws with the people that she loves. They wanted advice. There needs to be a bit of context added for the next part. Before Jackie's grandparents died, they set aside a 12-plot space in the local cemetery to accommodate the needs of their kids and grandkids. A good bit of forward thinking, as Jackie's mom was one of 5 daughters. As fate would have it, the only one of the 5 daughters who was buried there was Jackie's mother, in addition to her father and her cousin. So of the 12 plots, only 5 were in use at the time. Each of the 5 sisters also inherited a bit of farmland, and each built houses close by. Their children, Jackie and Bertha's generation, grew up close to each other, and so a few of them stuck around and built homes to raise their children as well, my wife and Sarah's generation. Jackie and her brother inherited some land from their mother, which they rented out to be farmed. Next to it is Bertha and her twin sister's land. Both are accessed by the same path, the only access to Bertha's land, by the way. Roadside access is owned by the state, and the path itself is owned entirely by Jackie and her brother. I will spare the details of my wife's reaction, but suffice it to say, at the end of the conversation she had suggested moving Heath, moving her grandparents, and establishing a family cemetery elsewhere. If they want it, they can effing choke on it, was what my wife said. This was not contrition, it was a F you, and my in-laws approved. The legality of it all, and realized a little later, was what the majority of the remaining plots would become entirely unusable. Moving Heath and Jackie's parents would create 3 empty plots, and Sarah's plot would be a 4th. Mitch and Jackie's would make 6 spaces total, all owned by our family. This means that of the original 12, there would only be 3 empty plots left not owned by us. In the interim, another family member passed and was buried there, 2 unclaimed plots of 12 with 6 sitting empty and cannot be used. To some, that would be enough. To my wife, a woman who thinks burning bridges gives off a lovely glow, this was only the appetizer to a meal that will take years to finish. More on that in a moment. We set aside space on the family's farmland to lay Heath and Jackie's parents to rest back in January of this year. It is quiet there, set against tall pines with open fields leading up to it. It's a good spot and with plenty of room for those of us who want it to be our place of rest. The only issue is that the path to access it is pretty far away. At my wife's suggestion, when planting season starts, Jackie and her brother will ask the people who rent the land to disc over the path and establish a new one closer to the cemetery. By the way, as mentioned above, this is the only access to Bertha's land. We have not told her, and we are not planning on it. The whole frontage of her land is covered in trees. Hopefully she finds out before the folks who farm it show up to start planting for the season. For all her disgusting behavior though, some I left out because it's already pretty long, Bertha is a highly respected medical educator in the community. She is known to just about every nurse in the county, and hell, she was my wife's nursing instructor in college. The thing is, my wife is also well established and highly respected in the community, and she has made sure that word is getting out about Bertha's behavior. It's a slow trickle, but that's often what wears stone down the best. Water is patient like that. Might take a little bit, but once it's done, you cannot unchange what people know about you. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. My parents, hardworking immigrants from Mexico, instilled in me a deep sense of justice and a fierce determination to succeed. They poured everything they had into giving me opportunities they never had, my mom juggling multiple jobs to save for my college fund and my dad working punishing hours in construction to keep a roof over our heads. Their unwavering belief in me led me to Baylor Law and ultimately to a position at a small personal injury firm in San Antonio. I threw myself into work driven by a passion for defending the rights of the marginalized and exploited. Our clients were primarily working-class Latinos, many of them undocumented, toiling in dangerous jobs with little recourse when injured. All over Texas, predatory employers, insurers, and lawyers prey on these vulnerable communities, knowing language barriers and fear of deportation keeps many from fighting back. I quickly earned a reputation as a tenacious advocate willing to go toe-to-toe with powerful interests on behalf of the powerless. Late nights, poring over medical records and liability waivers, standing up to corporate lawyers in court and at the negotiating table, this was my calling. Still, the long hours and distance from Dallas meant fewer visits home to see my aging parents. Our phone calls were filled with catching up on family gossip and my latest courtroom triumphs, but looking back, I missed the warning signs of trouble. The first inkling came when my dad suffered a devastating leg injury at his construction site. A badly set scaffold collapsed, sending him plummeting 2 stories. He narrowly avoided being paralyzed, but the compound fractures to his tibia and ankle were a career-ending catastrophe. I offered to take on his workers' comp case immediately, knowing that he would need every penny to cover his surgeries and long rehab ahead. But my proud, stubborn father refused, insisting he already had a lawyer and didn't want to impose. No matter how much I pushed, he wouldn't budge, placating me with vague assurances that my uncle would help navigate the language barrier. Buried in my own caseload, I let it drop. I didn't learn until much later that my uncle had never been involved at all. Weeks passed and I was shocked to get the news that Dad's case had been settled for a whopping $380,000. The seriousness of his injuries, the permanent mobility issues he'd face, the pain management and physical therapy he would require for life, it added up to a strong claim. But for an undocumented construction worker, it was a nearly unprecedented payout. I was so relieved I wept at my desk, the weight of worry I'd been carrying evaporating in an instant. I immediately took time off and drove up to Dallas to celebrate with my family, a whirlwind weekend of laughter, tears and mom's homemade tamales. My dad did not want to dwell on the details of the case, so I didn't press, giddy with joy and more than a little tequila. I found it strange that this lawyer was notably absent from the festivities, not even popping in for a congratulatory handshake, but chalked it up to a busy schedule. That blissful ignorance shattered a few months later when my uncle appeared unannounced on my doorstep, grim-faced and clutching an overstuffed manila folder. "Mio, we need to talk," he said, voice heavy with worry. "Your papa, he's in trouble." Stunned, I invited him in, mind-reading as he recounted a twisted tale of greed manipulation and brazen fraud dating back months. Basically, the lawyer my dad hired was not the benevolent advocate he had claimed. He was a shark well known in legal circles for aggressive ambulance chasing and a roster of exclusively Latino clients despite not speaking a word of Spanish. More concerning, my dad apparently had not seen a penny of his settlement. The money had supposedly been paid out, but he and mom were working themselves to the bone, my mom juggling part-time gigs while my dad took whatever odd construction jobs he could land under the table. His leg was not healing properly, the constant strain setting back his recovery. But they were drowning in unpaid medical bills. Even worse, the lawyer had them convinced this was the only way, that if they stopped paying him, he would report them to ICE and they would be deported. He dangled the promise of the settlement over their heads, claiming the funds were tied up in red tape at the insurance company, but if they just kept quiet and kept paying, it would all work out. A little digging revealed the extent of the lawyer's crimes. He had used a network of shell companies to divert settlement funds, paying out only a trickle to keep clients complacent. The threat of deportation was his trump card, wielded again and again to silence any complaints. On paper, his clients received their full payouts, but in reality, they remained indebted to him indefinitely, bound by fear. I was both horrified and consumed with guilt. How could I have missed this? How could I have left my parents so vulnerable? I knew I had to make it right, but I also knew I could not be reckless. As much as I wanted to storm into the lawyer's office and confront him, I knew it would only backfire. He was too slippery, too well insulated by a web of lies and accomplices. If I tipped him off, he would bury the evidence and likely retaliate against my family. Instead, I went to my firm and laid out the whole sordid story. To their immense credit, they immediately threw their full support behind me. We quietly hired a crackerjack team of private investigators and started building an ironclad case. For months, we surveilled the lawyer, documenting his every move. Cash withdrawals from client trust accounts, clandestine meetings with known associates, even verbal threats made to a sobbing client in a shadowy parking lot. We caught it all on camera. The evidence was damning, but we needed even more. We needed a paper trail proving the depths of his financial misdeeds. I embedded myself in the Latino community, earning trust and gathering testimony from his past victims. Horror stories of lost homes, of medical needs going unmet, of years spent in indentured servitude to a sociopath with a law degree. Bit by excruciating bit, the puzzle pieces fell into place. Shell companies, forged signatures, cooked books, a far-reaching conspiracy to defraud the most vulnerable for personal gain. When we finally took our case to the DA, it was a slam dunk. The lawyer and his cronies were arrested in a dramatic sting operation that made the front page of every paper in the state. Charges of grand larceny, fraud, extortion, and a host of other crimes carrying the promise of decades behind bars. In the end, the lawyer opted to plead guilty, hoping for leniency. At his sentencing, the judge was disgusted by him for the betrayal of the very people he had sworn an oath to defend. He got several years in prison and a lifetime disbarment, a fitting end for a career built on lies. For my family, it was a bittersweet victory. They got their money back, every penny, but the scars ran deep. Dad's leg had healed improperly in the intervening months and would never be the same. The years of crippling stress and financial instability had taken their toll. I moved them down to San Antonio, where I could ensure they got the best possible care. Also physical therapy, counseling, and specialists for every need. I was determined to give them back the peaceful retirement they deserved. It was an adjustment for all of us, but we navigated it together. And before we end the video, we will read another story from r/petty revenge. It is titled Revenge Served Cold. So I've got a great example of petty revenge, not mine, but my late partner's. I was thinking about it the other day and figured it definitely belonged here. So my late partner used to work as a bartender in a modern bar. Lots of cool IPAs open to all ages, and it even had a toy box for people who brought their kids. And in that toy box was a kazoo. One afternoon, a pair of parents let their kids get their hands on that kazoo right at the start of the day, and the kid did not let it go, like ever. The parents managed to find the table furthest from the bar out on the terrace, and their kid spent hours blowing that thing nonstop, annoying the hell out of everyone else while the parents did not lift a finger the entire time. Well, the afternoon went by, the evening rolled in, and around 8 p.m. they suddenly remembered they had a kid. They came back, picked her up, dropped the kazoo back in the toy box, and headed for their car. And that is when the petty revenge hit. My partner grabbed the kazoo, caught up with them just before they reached the car, and handed it to the kid with a big smile. Oh, she seemed to love it so much, she can have it. The look on the parents' faces, too polite to say no, was worth every screechy minute of that noisy afternoon. So yeah, not my own story, but I think it deserved to be told. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.